This episode of the BREWtallyspeaking podcast is brought to you by On Point Pomade. Keep your beard and hair looking on point with their line of pomades and beard oils over at onpointpomade.com. Use our code BSP15 at checkout and get 15% off your total purchase order. So thanks again to On Point Pomade for sponsoring our show. This episode is also sponsored by the Bean Bastard Coffee. Head over to thebeanbastard.com and pick up any one of their delicious hand-roasted coffees. Coffee lovers will also enjoy their hand-cut and handmade espresso candles and soaps as well. If you're in the Buffalo, New York area, head to their store located at 448 Elmwood Avenue. And thanks again to the Bean Bastard for supporting this show. The Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Rockabilia.com. With over 500,000 officially licensed items in their online store, you're guaranteed to find something you need. Use our code BREWtally and get 10% off your total purchase order. Now on to the show.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard. And you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give up.
You already know what it is when you hear that can open. It is time to get into another episode of the BREWtallyspeaking podcast. I'm your host, John, and this episode's guest is Billy from A Perfect Circle. This was one that I was really looking forward to for a multitude of reasons. When the email came through with the new record of Billy's, What Normal Was, which is out now, I was really interested to see what this was going to sound like for like I said, a multitude of reasons. First of all, A Perfect Circle of Mer De Noms is one of my favorite records of all times. There's something sonically about it. There's just so many intangibles that make that record phenomenal from start to finish. A classic album, a perfect album, whatever it is that you want to refer to it as, it is. But beyond that, there has been solo material from Billy under a different band name. So when someone decides to put out new music as themselves, it kind of makes you start going, well, what is it about this collection of music that made you put your own name on it, that made you feel like it is you that you're showcasing to the world? And like I even start off by saying in the the chat itself, even in the press bio, it says, hi, Billy would like to introduce you to himself, even though we've known him for decades. And so just from that talking point alone, it gets really interesting as to what goes into a quote-unquote solo record. And, upon the first couple of songs, listening to it, it just instantly draws you in, especially if you're a fan of bands like, The Cure, Depeche Mode, and, some of the more kind of gothier elements of like Sisters of Mercy or things like that. Like, it's just, it is kind of what makes Billy himself, I think. And it was really great getting to talk to him. And that's one of the things that, has been crazy in doing this podcast is getting to talk to people that, I look and hold in such a high regard, going all the way back to high school with my relationship, as it were, with Billy's music. So it's really cool to get to talk to someone like him, and he is someone too that is a little bit daunting to talk to because he does a really good job of speaking eloquently and no words wasted kind of a person. And I always think those are some of the more interesting people to talk to because I don't know, I just do. I mean, it's funny, as I was listening to a podcast with Doc Coyle, I feel the same way about him, where I feel like he, and I've made no bones about this, where he is just someone I hold in such a high regard as a intellectual, and I think Billy is in that same realm for me. So this was a really cool conversation I got to have with him, and I'm gonna, you heard me open the can. I'm gonna real quickly. It's funny sometimes, I just announced last night, as of when I'm recording this, the monthly 6-pack that I'm curating over at Rishi's. I made a video showcasing what my 6-pack is for the inaugural one, and So one of the things I try to do is, obviously I drink a lot of different things. I like to be well-rounded, well-versed, even in my musical tastes. And so currently drinking a Wiseman Distillery Blueberry Hard Seltzer. I guess blueberry is the flavor this year. I'm noticing blueberry is like the it flavor, no matter if it's a stout, a porter, seltzers, ales, IPAs. Like everyone is getting into the blueberry flavor. So it's always interesting when you kind of start seeing trends happening before they kind of start happening. Because I also notice that usually is what happens with food, blueberry flavor things or whatever. So I'm interested to see if that continues. So here we go. That is more of a like candy blueberry flavor. The hard seltzer is kind of, I think, what people don't like about seltzers. It's a little more dull. You get a really great burst of blueberry flavor right up front, followed by kind of the dullness of the seltzer itself. This isn't terrible. Definitely have had way worse. But I think this is one I probably would drink one of and probably be done with it. But speaking of something I want to be done with, let's be done with this intro. Let's get into my conversation with Billy, and I'll talk to you all on the other side of it. See you then. So this is actually more of a just kind of a conversation versus kind of the press junket, tell me about the record and all that kind of stuff, as I know you're probably doing so much of that right now. But I wanted to kind of start off, though, interestingly enough, with the tour rehearsals and prepping up and so forth, without necessarily giving too much away of what the live show is going to entail as far as all the songs and so forth. I always find it interesting when bands kind of go into a rehearsal for a tour and what songs they pick and how you end up choosing those depending on, the various layers and so forth that are in these songs and having to figure out how those work in a live setting. So what has been your approach for this tour, especially in the case where, technically you only have just this one album out at this point?
Yeah, well, I've got this album and then the first Ashes record. So, I guess, let's get right to the confusing part of me changing the name of this project to my name instead of using Ashes. Even in all my folders that I've been working on, I still have them just for organization's sake. It still says Ashes Divide. But made the decision over this past summer to call it just Billy Howerdel. And we can go in to answer your question. We can circle back to that name thing, but I'll play some songs off the first Ashes record. But I plan on playing this whole new record live. As long as we're not in an opening position, because there's only a few shows that we're opening for Pussifer for 2 shows. And I think we're on a festival or 2, which will probably be a limited set. But otherwise, the plan is to go back and revisit some of those from the first Ashes record and maybe give them a little 2022 tune up and, kind of put them into the aesthetic of this record a little bit and breathe a little modern life into them.
Well, I guess kind of, you sort of touched on something there that I find interesting. The opening line to your press bio actually states, that after all these years and shows, Billy is ready to introduce himself. And to me, having gone through a rebrand of the show and name a few years ago and a rebrand visually of the show in the last 3 to 4 months, it's interesting to me the concept that after decades of musical output that you have, that this is possibly the first time you felt comfortable enough to put your own name on it. And what kind of a journey that is, that leads you to rebranding the name and then kind of going with your own name for this output. If you can speak to that a little bit more.
It's funny. I just got off what I was doing right before speaking with you is I was interviewing a friend of mine, Greg Pucciato, for Revolver magazine. And so he's got a cover feature on there, and they just had me interviewing him. And this just was the last thing we touched on, which was a dinner that I had with him and Jerry Cantrell literally a year ago. It was in May of last year. And I was wrapping, my record was kind of done, wasn't fully mixed yet, but it was certainly representative of where it is now. And talked about the band name thing, and I was really struggling with it, going back and forth. And I had to make a decision because we were going to start putting shows on sale, but that got pushed. But the idea of like that, I think being younger and coming from New Jersey, I don't know if it's an East Coast mentality thing. Greg and I were trying to put our finger on it. He's from Baltimore, and we're just like, yeah. So like that original, that thing of like, how dare you use your own name? Like, who do you think you are? And I think it's either culture, age, or time, or like whatever it is, has finally gone like, no, this is something I should be proud of, and this is for all essence a solo project, and hiding behind a moniker. I mean, hiding behind, it's a pejorative way to say it, right? But you still, like, you can go behind a moniker for a band name, although, is Nine Inch Nails, was it Trent? Yes, right. But I understand why I didn't want to use his name when he started out, but it gets a little more complicated when you get into merch and stuff like that. I can see where it gets a little sticky, and I'm still kind of going, okay, it's got to be a creative way to put your name on a shirt and have it be represented. But I have no problem wearing some other guys, girls, solo project, their name on a shirt, so I should get over it. But yeah, it just comes to a place where you go, well, this is truly me. It's always been me, right? But like, this album in particular feels more disclosing than previous works, I should say. And I think just vocally and where I'm singing, I mean, that's kind of what I might have been talking about within that bio, that if it was a quote for me, I don't know if it was, but it was just that this is more my voice than having a character, let's say, than in the Ashes record, where it's really, I'm pushing into pretty high ranges, and went out with an idea in mind. And whereas this record is just an unfolding of me, this, like, getting back to what made music tick for me when I was a kid, a young teen, and what was that excitement like, and tapping back into that and just saying, this is kind of where I started, but with a fresh, modern, a take from today on a picture back to where I started.
It's interesting, as you kind of say that it's almost like there becomes a sort of, and I don't want to say a shield necessarily, but it's almost like you're putting one up, kind of, because, in not calling a project or something yourself, but it's almost like it sets up a safety net that if something isn't successful, that maybe it's almost like a mental shield of like, then it's not me. It was kind of whatever you've given the previous name to. And I'd kind of been wondering and thinking more about that as I've kind of thought about my own journey of using a placeover name and couldn't come up with anything better. And then, getting a co-host and my name and face is all over this thing. And it just felt a bit disingenuous, almost kind of like you said with the merch, that it sort of becomes this thing of like, how it's a little bit more scarier to kind of go out as yourself, because any backlash or criticism you face, that's you. It's your name and everything on it. And that when looking back, it's interesting how fearless I kind of was initially to not be afraid to put out my name and face on something in a creative sense for the first time. But as I've kind of gotten older and been thinking about this more recently over the last 5 years of doing the show, that I feel like I finally have given myself the permission to kind of be me and put more of myself out there than I think maybe others would at this point. I don't know.
And then so there's costs and benefits, right? We all have seen the example of people pulling it off, right? If not to compare ourselves at all to this, but when you look at David Bowie, you don't think twice about, well, how dare that guy use his name? It reinvented himself throughout his career, and you didn't know what to expect. And whatever it was David Bowie, and if it was called something else, if they were called the Black Speakers or the Red Bricks or whatever it was, he might have been pigeonholed into some other thing, right? And so it kind of gives you permission to branch out and just go, whatever comes on this project is something that comes from me. I don't know. It's interesting. But yeah, there's definitely an ego thing that you have to contend with, and there's also the permission, like you said. And I was lucky enough to have my best friend's mother, who grew up next door to us, really posed the question to me early, like, do you deserve to be rich? And of course I was like, no, what are you talking about? Like, she's like, why? And it's like that psychological question experiment. You go like, where I grew up, like, I didn't know anyone that was rich. but I knew people that have more and less money than us, but for the most part, everyone's pretty much the same, right? And the thought of that was just so frightening because of the backlash, right? Because of the how dare you think you're better than me? How dare you do something different than we all do? There's just like this I don't know, this homogeny that you're kind of forced to stay within and keep your head down, or you get hammered. And I think there's a part of just growing older and realizing like that's just fear of the mob. That's everyone else's fear that's playing into you. There's some way to, with integrity, present yourself and not hide behind something. So yeah.
It's funny, you and I have basically had a very similar exchange with people close to us. Actually, I think someone that you had just talked to recently, Dewey from the Pure Pleasure podcast a little bit ago, when he and I had first gotten introduced to one another, he would kind of go, "Oh, have you tried reaching out and getting so-and-so on the show? I think you would do really well talking to that person." And I would go, I just don't think I'm on the level to talk to that person, more from a statistical and analytical level that management would look at. And he goes, "Are you not a person? Are they not a person?" And I would go, "Well, yeah." And he goes, "So why don't you have the right to, or the ability to talk to these people? They're just people." And he said it so matter-of-factly that when he said it, I just kind of stopped for a minute and kind of had to laugh. That it's like, you're 100% right. There is no reason why I shouldn't have the ability to get to talk to anyone. However, there are these, I think, our own mental hang-ups of self-worth or imposed worth. And, in this industry, there are gatekeepers and so forth, and we understand why they exist, but at times I think it does kind of put this hierarchy on us where maybe we don't value ourselves as much as we actually are worth, or don't feel like we bring as much to the table. And it's interesting that there are those in this industry that seemingly don't have or suffer from that problem at all. But at times it's funny, as you were kind of saying that, talking to your friend's mom, that, why don't you deserve to be rich? And that's something very akin to something I was asked in therapy, where it was like, you seem like you don't deserve X, Y, or Z, or you don't think you are deserving of it. And why not? And I really kind of had to think about it for a little bit. And I don't know if it's a generational thing of just kind of growing up in the don't settle, always strive to do more, but you kind of get it hammered into you so much that you then start looking at it from the adverse of it all of, I guess my best isn't my best. And so it kind of creates this interesting duality, I guess, of how you live and exist.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I would have actually taken the leap and done my own music if it wasn't for a few key conversations that happened over the course of years. It wasn't like an overnight thing, but I was a tech. I worked for many bands, but one of the first bands I worked for was Fishbone, and the guitar player Kendall took me out to dinner one night, and up until that point, and even after, I just looked at my job as I'm in a service position to the guitar player, right? My whole job is to make sure that they don't think about their gear when they're on stage. Like everything is handled, And he took me out one night and said, "Let me ask you something. Why are you working for me? I've heard your demos. I've heard what you're doing. What are you doing?" And it was a little bit like half aggressive and half loving kind of sentiment. That's just saying, get out there and do it, And at that time I was 22, maybe. And still I was like, I took it as a compliment, but didn't fully go forward with it. But he and I started playing some music together, nothing really came of it. We had a couple ideas tossing around, but, it kind of gave me that confidence to, okay, well, maybe that's enough for me to show somebody what I'm working on, which was hard for me. I wrote songs all through the 90s working for bands on my 4-track with a drum machine on headphones, on the bus at night when people went to sleep. And it was because I felt proud of it, but I just didn't feel like it was ready for public consumption. But when is it ever? And now I've got kids, and in particular, I was talking to my son about that breakthrough of courage to stop tinkering with a song, or to allow yourself to begin with a very simple idea. I mean, the most anxiety provoking thing to do is to look at a Bohemian Rhapsody and think the demons in us can say, well, go ahead and try and produce that song right now. Well, that's impossible. And they couldn't reproduce something like that if they were all sitting in the same place either. It starts from a foundational thing of one little idea that builds upon another, and then that energy begets energy, and you start to collaborate once it gets its foundation. And it's all a process, and that's the work of collaboration. Even though this is a creative field and being an artist is like that, it's a hard job to sign up for, because you have to know that you're probably not going to make money. And if you do, you're extremely fortunate to be in the right place, right time, and have all your creative cylinders firing at the right time. So I think this is more to speak to anyone that's trying to make it, to say, look, you got to be okay with not making it. You got to be okay with just doing it for the love of the craft. But it is work. It is like something that you shouldn't look at as a chore. You look at it as a challenge. That's like you chipping away, and just no little idea is worth throwing away. They're worth putting in a bank account and even rediscovering 2 years down the road and say, oh, I wrote that. Wow, I'm kind of inspired by that. And you can almost find yourself jamming with yourself. I think it's just something not to forget. And it probably applies to other places in life, but just to speak, narrowly to music, I think it's an important thing to remember.
I was just talking during this chat I did a couple hours ago, and we got to talking about journaling, and the singer of this band was talking about how he's been writing in this journal since he can remember, and remembered that in his early childhood, some of these things and adversities he was going through, his family was going through, and that it's always been therapeutic for him. So he's kind of always done it. But then he goes, it's interesting. We look back on these things, either we can learn a lot about ourselves, a lot about other people we surround ourselves with, and we can find inspiration. And when we find ways of maybe tackling things that we didn't quite understand then, maybe we didn't have the tools to understand or work through. And I feel like musically, that's kind of the same thing. I'm not necessarily writing down or jamming all the time and jotting down my ideas, but it's funny how there will be something and I'll hear it and go, man, I kind of don't know what to do with this, or it didn't really take me anywhere when I wrote it. But when I hear it back, I go, oh, it kind of makes me think of this, or, even I can kind of feel the emotion coming out of my own playing, that I'm like, oh man, I could tell I was really kind of in a sad state, or like these things, these emotions that you're able to kind of get out of it. And so I feel like for someone that, is older than me, like you are, where you have all these experiences of having written longer, then it would probably be like an audio diary or a journal of sorts, where you kind of go back and maybe are inspired or fuel these things that maybe you felt in the moment of writing. And I feel like that can't help but inspire you, even if it's just nothing more than kind of thinking back on it and going, oh, I'm really glad I did that. And it may not turn into anything just yet, but not sure if I lost you there.
You got me, or did I lose you?
I got you now.
Okay, cool. I don't know if you caught that last part. Did you catch it?
I did not.
Oh, okay. Let's see if I can rehash that. It was that, being able to listen to your own, putting your ideas down, having them worthy enough for you to listen to. But, if you can't, you might be writing for the wrong reasons. You might be writing for, fame, money, some angle to something else. You want it to be authentic. People sniff authentic, and I think that's what they tend to buy. Now, not everybody buys the same culture, right? It's like you have to find the lane you want to get within. But it's. I'm sure this is old news, but just you've got to be authentic.
100%. I think something, before I even heard a note of your album, the interesting thing is when we get these media links, it's probably how most people are actually going to consume this art. As far as it's digital, you don't really get a whole lot with it. It's just the songs. I don't even get the lyrics, or, I get the album artwork, but it's kind of a shame, because I love taking it all in, because it's all a part of the total package of everything. Yeah. And to me, when I at least was looking at, just the album artwork and then the song titles, since that's literally all I had, it was interesting to even just in song titles feel like this was going to be a bit of an emotional journey. I mean, you start off with a song like Selfish Heart to then Free and Weightless, and getting all the way into the end of the album with Bring Honor Back Home. And it just kind of feels like someone who is being so honest with themselves, but also the listener, and kind of just really bearing yourself. And to me, it's funny when I look at the album title with it being called What Normal Was, even thinking about that where the concept of quote unquote normal is ever changing, just like we as people are. So to me, I kind of got this narrative of just like what normal was, maybe as a reference to what normal was to you when these songs were written, or what inspired you to kind of write these songs, going back to maybe your early influences of what was normal then for you to write like this. And just the open-endedness of it all was just really intriguing to think about in concept, especially let alone an execution on how you did it on this record. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit kind of about the song titles and I guess even the album title itself.
Yeah, I had a different album title that I actually really liked. I mean, I really liked it. I think it was A minus title, and this one just came to me. I think it was I heard someone say something that inspired me to just make a slight twist of the phrase, and yeah, because the record has the elements for me of looking back to the time of my life when music hit the hardest, that sting of your early teens, your tween teen years, and yeah, the way it started for me, at least musically, like everything starts with an idea, and the idea was just taking a look at that time and what was it that made me feel electric, like I couldn't listen to this music enough. I mean, I close my eyes and just go somewhere else, right? And I grew up in a pretty rural town, but on a lake, and it was ice in the winter, and you swim in the summer, and it was like a nice place to grow up for sure. But it was like a lot of alone reflection time, a lot of riding bikes in the woods, and camping and stuff like that. So it was just that I could kind of go back to that time and just kind of tap into, if I could make that music, then if I could just bring my whatever I've learned along the way, and to be able to make the music that I would have back then. That's what I tried to do with this record. And it really is with a take of being 2021 really when it got done. So yeah, but then there's the inverse of what normal was. I mean, that's the moment you're in. I mean, the thing you're really, I try to strive for, I think one of the meanings of life, right, is to strive for the inverse of going back to the living in the past or living in some anxiety future. You're trying to be present and where you are right now, and just, and have a little bit of humor and humility to it. Like just looking at whatever you're going through as, that's interesting that I react to this situation like I am right now, whether that's with elation or, complete dismay or whatever you're going through, just what it's so interesting to be you in this moment, and all that all that's come before this moment to make you feel the way you do about this moment. It's like, it kind of has both things for me. It's like the inverse of the memory and the living in the moment.
It's so funny you bring this up, and the people who potentially listened to the show a bit, I apologize for beating this concept to death over the last month or so of me coming up with it, but it's the first time, obviously, that you will hear it from me. But I've been thinking about how, as artists, especially musicians, I'll say for the sake of my question, I've been thinking about how we as fans are constantly behind you as far as what you're creating. Potentially with this album and these songs, you may have been sitting on these for a year or 2, 4 or 5, depending on how long or old some of this material is. And so the things that you're going through currently are maybe informing you of what your current art is, but then you're having to go back and live the old things and maybe either rehash old feelings, old ideas, or whatever. And potentially with another year or two down the road, different perspectives on something that doesn't mean the same to you as it did when you created this. And just living in this weird bubble of never being in the present nor the past, nor really the future, but kind of just trying to traverse all three at once, given your profession of being a professional musician, and kind of thinking about that.
I would say this record's a little different than any of it I've released before because of the pandemic and it's delayed schedules, and there's so many false starts. It's so many false starts during this, and I set a target to make a record and have it out by November of 2019 because I got off the road with Perfect Circle. Our last tour ended at the end of 18, and that was a very unrealistic target to hit, but that's okay. It was a North Star to point at. And then it came to be that, okay, now I'm really May 2020 was the date. So I really was wrapping everything up by March, and you know what happened, right? So come March, everything changed, and everything changed and had to delay and not have to finish it, and also could sit on these things a little longer. But rewinding to any other record I've done, it's like you finish the record and you're always in a rush, and someone's always on you going, okay, we had a schedule, we're behind schedule, the record's got to be done because you got to start press and music videos and art and everything like that. And this one was a little like, I've been waiting around to share these songs for a long time, so now I'm kind of picking them back up and listening to them after 6 months, let's say. The mastering's been in for more than that. But the great thing about it is, I was a little worried about having, let's say, sonic regrets or song regrets. Not really regrets, but you can look back at something and go, I could have done more to it. And I don't feel that way, honestly, about this record. Like I got it exactly where I wanted it because I had the time to do it. I had the time to go tighten screws down or shine or put, break things the way I wanted them to be. It's nice to be able to stand behind it at this point. I mean, I just wouldn't say anything if I didn't feel that way, but I truly do. So
having done both, where you have your deadlines and so forth, and then in spite of this one, having some of the setbacks of the release date getting pushed, due to the events and the climate that we're in, is there one that you feel you work better within? Like, do you work better when you have the time crunch and it has a deadline and it has to be done and you can't tinker with it anymore? Or do you like just having the freedom to spend as much time with the project as you want and maybe are better at knowing when it's done and not overdoing it to death?
Well, I liked this. I like this let's say what I thought was going to happen. I thought the pandemic was going to afford us 6 months. I really, at the beginning, I mean, we all didn't know what it was going to be, but thought like, okay, summer's going to come around. We're going to get this built immunity. We're going to, come June, we're going to start to see a little lift. But so I stayed really optimistic and really up, like in that adrenaline mode, all the way up until I would say August, until it hit me. And then I was like, this isn't coming out. We can't do this right now. There's too many people trying to go out and do shows and then get canceled. And then, so that was a bit of a kick in the nuts, I have to say. Like, you have to kind of pick yourself up after that and then figure out how to get excited again about the record. One thing is, like, usually, you have a listening party. I haven't even had a listening event or party for friends and family yet. And that's something that's kind of signifies the end of a record. You get together and I look forward to those for, my friends who finish records, or if I do one. Like, it's a nice thing to do, to go to someone's, even if it's in their living room, and sit around with, 15 of your friends and listen to a record. It's, it's just something I haven't done yet. So there's just a different ritual that's happened with this record. But getting back to being able to tweak it, it was nice having this guy, Matty Green, who mixed the record for me. I never met him in person still. We did it real time. I listened in full fidelity with a service through Logic and Pro Tools to, he mixed a record and got to make comments as we went. And he was really gracious in doing little touch-ups, but they were like tiny little touch-ups along the way. I could call him 2 weeks later and go, "Hey, how about I'm going to give you a harmony for that song. Would have been cool to put on there." He was like, "No problem." He's Canadian. He's the nicest guy in the world. And he's super talented. And he just wanted it to be right. We had time to do it. So,
it's interesting in listening to this record, to me, how it reminds me of kind of growing up in the mid to late 80s, more so the late 80s for me, since I was born in 84. But, being a product of the MTV generation and just popular radio at this time. And this feels like a lot of the bands that I look back to now. And I'm so enamored with, because I can't believe how timeless the songs are, but really it's the production that stands out to me. You look at something, I'm kind of thinking like Tears for Fears or Depeche Mode or even some Sisters of Mercy or Bauhaus and stuff like that. And kind of even a little bit of The Cure. And I guess sort of just, it was deemed at the time, I guess, goth rock or whatever, but it's just more of alternative because it borrows from so many different things. And it's just interesting to me how locked into that it sounds nostalgic in its time, but it sounds production wise like it's from this time too. And I feel like that's got to be such an interesting line to straddle, where it feels true to the era and the vibe that you're trying to capture, but still sounding, I don't want to say relevant, but I'm trying to find the word. It sounds contemporary with the other releases of this time frame right now. And I feel like that's got to be an interesting tightrope to kind of walk creatively.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it was. And thank you. I think that's probably the nicest thing you could say to me. But because that was kind of the point, or at least the mission. And because it was, the time of me growing up in music. I mean, from 81 to 84 was where I really targeted this record to be. But there was the things I loved at that time were definitely a little more sparse in production, but the songs, like you said, the melodies and the strength of music there was so much great stuff. But if you knew that genre, you mostly knew everything there was, right? It wasn't like endless choices now. You're not like browbeaten with so many things. There's so much great music that's out now. And it's just, but the way it's made, a lot of new music that I hear, and I've got 2 kids, so like I hear, they listen to trap a lot but they listen to, stuff that's current. And I get why it's great and there's energy to it, but there's also a disposableness to it that for me as a musician, an engineer, a producer, when I start to identify what the loop is, it's a bummer. It's for me, too many of these songs are like watching a big Hollywood blockbuster movie, and I'm seeing the boom mic in the frame. So I'm kind of pulled out, even though it's lit perfect. I'm getting the performance, but it's like there's something missing. And I think
it's the attention to detail. I think it's the intangibles that are not done to perfection. So you're able to kind of not be able to just not.
Well, there's that, but I'm talking about even people making modern music with just loops, which can sound great, right? There's but you or anyone's got access. If I give a laptop to, a 12-year-old right now, I could show them how to use Logic and build a song, and they will make something that will blow your mind within 30 minutes. But it gets to the point of where, let's fast forward to, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years. Certainly by 15 years, you're going to be able to type those words into a computer, make me a song that has a bit of, Sisters of Mercy with U2 and a little bit of Barbra Streisand. And the computer's going to make it. Like right now you have to drag and drop it. So at what point are you impressed by that? And how many times can we be, when is it watered down? And I think that there's the danger. I think you started to say this, but like, what's interesting to me is that there's another wabi sabi is the one way to say it in Japanese, but there's another one about the beauty of imperfections and when they put that gold, they fix a broken chair with gold or brass or something, and it becomes more beautiful. The more mistakes and the more breaks it has in it, the more gold it gets, and it's almost like wearing those as badges of honor and badges and this beauty. And that's what I love about things that are dangerous music that truly is not just trying to be poserishly dangerous. I think like the White Stripes, I think I'll say Jack White is one of the last rock stars, to me, like I've seen him play and singing. I think he's a great singer, but just playing, he's like a dangerous guitar player. I don't know how else to say it. I don't know, because his guitar is probably out of tune and it's probably not working correctly. And he just forces it he bends it to his will. And it's just, there's something like, I don't know what's going to happen next. The Horrors is another one of my favorite bands. And I think I went to go see them on their first records tour. And I was like, I don't know if this guy's going to pull the PA stack down right now. Like, I really don't know what's going to happen, but I'm completely along for the ride. This is amazing. And I'm not bored. And I find like too much modern music gets boring, and I think that there's a reason why I think kids have trouble hearing things that aren't perfectly in tune. They're so used to everything being, I'm not even just talking about auto-tune as an effect, like everything's just so perfectly tuned. They're missing the beauty of the human element within it, whatever it was from us as cavemen at campfires sharing stories. Like there's something that needs to remain that way within art. So yeah, if you can keep all that broken stuff within there and then throw the polish on top of it, leave some of those brass and gold kind of, epoxy, places to mend it all together. I think that's where music's interesting.
I feel like you're almost making an analogy for music. You're almost describing the same thing that I feel like culturally we as Americans go through, where, I've never been, so like, obviously I think you would be able to speak to this more than I can, but just in researching, watching documentaries and just seeing things on various social networks and so forth, that culturally it seems like other cultures appreciate their past. They find ways, as you were just saying, like taking the imperfection and kind of making it more valuable because you still have and maintain the originality of that thing and what that thing was. Whereas I feel like we culturally always want new and very shiny, and anything that's old or quote unquote imperfect has no value. And I feel like that's, you just kind of basically summed up in a musical metaphor. And as I was kind of thinking about that, that's such a beautiful way of saying it. Finding value in something that's imperfect and kind of, instead of looking at it as a negative, finding a way to turn it into a positive. And it's all about perspective and mentality, which I think, I can say thankfully, having gone through therapy, that was a big turning point for me, was changing perspective on things and looking for something positive and being more in the moment versus overanalyzing and trying to make something better that didn't need to be.
Sure. Framing is everything, right? Framing is everything in your personal life and your business life, your artistic life. Two people writing about, sitting in the same scene are going to write two completely different stories depending on, their well-being, their stress level, what they just came from. That if you want to go down the rabbit hole of free will, I mean, you're in that sense of, yes, you have free will, but you are not, I'm a Sam Harris fan. So if I could quote Sam Harris, you didn't pick your parents or your genes or your experience as a toddler. You are operating with that software that's already been kind of assigned to you. Now that doesn't mean you should go on a killing rampage. It just means that there's a reason why you tick the way you do, right? So that's why it's interesting to think about it, not with judgment, not to say, oh, I suck or I'm great. It's just find it interesting. See if you can find that frame of, it's interesting to be me. Because it's like in personal life, I think things get a little easier, but if we're going back to music, it's just, you won't be as judgy, because if you're out to be a Journey cover band and you're trying to sing like Steve Perry, then good luck. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having a melting pot of your influences and having them be not quite perfect. And then that's what we're all looking for. We're looking for the next great melting pot of ideas.
I feel like that's going to be as good of a segue to kind of talk about this a little bit, because I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up. So Mer De Noms turns 22 in 13 days as of when we're talking. And it's kind of weird to think of a record that was so tied to like my senior year of high school, and to look back on it now and just kind of think about how I still listen to that record and get transported musically, but how I'm also able to identify with the lyrics and the vibes of the music completely differently as I've gotten older. And, you know, I don't know if anyone's really ever explained that or said that to you. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people come up and say like, oh, that record got me through this, or it reminds me of whatever. But has anyone ever told you that it's changed with them over the years? I mean, it's the same music, so that's kind of, you know, that's where I find it interesting, is how I've grown with this record, and it's changed what it means to me as I've gotten older, and I have a different life perspective. Has anyone kind of talked to you about that, especially? And, you know, I might be wrong with my translation, but the fact that, I mean, even the name of the record, Mer De Noms, means a sea of names. So it's kind of ever changing in and of itself in that capacity as well.
Right. Yes, someone has, but not as often. I think it is more, again, a very big compliment that, you know, someone's like, this record got me through this, you know, this hellish ride of my life, you know, and there was something to come back to give me an anchor, you know, something to keep me sane. I mean, it never gets old, somebody saying something like that, because it's always genuine. It always feels genuine, and it's you know, that's the greatest compliment, right? That I got into music to at least try and make somebody feel the way I did listening to stuff that inspired me. You know, you're just trying to pay it forward in some kind of way. And that's, you know, a great thing to say, but to have it evolve and stick with you. I mean, the biggest North Star I was trying to point out was time, you know, make something that's timeless. You know, there is one thing to do something that's stuck in the sound of a time, and another to just write songs that are hopefully going to stay there. And that's where I think like Martin Gore was amazing from Depeche Mode. He just, you could campfire song many of those Depeche Mode songs, and they live on an acoustic guitar on a campfire, same as they do with a minimalist, you know, very tasteful, aging gracefully production that they just had from record to record. And you know, there's many bands like that, you know, can still sound interesting, but just at their essence, they are, you know, great songs. You know, if you hear, you know, Frank Sinatra or Peaches playing a song and they both sound great in both forms, you know, you've got a great song, right?
It's funny. I had just been going through that the last week and a half or so with the Smiths back catalog, and just really being intrigued by how minimal the production is in the arrangement. And like, it's actually pretty sparse, all things considered, but it's just, everyone plays their parts so well that you can't imagine them being any other way.
Yeah.
But because when I think of the Smiths, I think of the guitars, and then what was kind of interesting as I've been going back and listening to some of the earlier stuff,
oh, God,
it's the bass. Exactly.
It's so good.
It's the bass. That's kind of the lead instrument, and it's kind of more ska influenced more than anything, kind of coming in, and the playing, you know, it's mostly acoustic guitar, and it's very kind of sparse in the arrangement, but it's just so interesting to see. And, you know, I believe the song is called Then Is Now or something like that. I'm kind of terrible with some of the song titles, but it's like a big single, like one of the big singles that I think everyone knows of when they think of the Smiths outside of...
What, How Soon Is Now?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
But when you look at that record and how much fuller it is with the like sounds and the delay guitars and the tremolo and stuff like that, and just how big and massive it is, it almost feels more cinematic than it was when you even look at a song like Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want. And it kind of goes into this weird, almost Italian style outro. And it's just the ability to pull off and create these songs that aren't necessarily meant to be a full piece, but just, I want to create this one song and it wants to sound this way, and letting it be. And it's just so interesting to go back and listen to it. And it's fun and it's poppy and it's quirky, but when you start kind of picking it apart more and you're like, man, there's so many layers to this. And to see the evolution of just these four guys, it's just incredible to kind of go back and that's kind of what I tend to do a lot more is, when people ask me, what do I listen to that's new and got me excited? But I tend to go, well, I kind of want to go back and see what my favorite bands were listening to. What were they inspired by? How do these influences start coming out? And then it's more fun to kind of get a bigger, broader spectrum of music and people and creativity than, just kind of being...
Yeah, I thought that...
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I thought that about Interpol. Like I think this is a product of getting a little older too. When I heard Interpol, I was in my 30s, and I wasn't as snobby as I was in my 20s, let's say, and I loved it. I thought like, I hear all the things they're biting in style, but they did it really well. I thought like they made a great collage and honoring a lot of great music from the 80s that I loved. And I could hear it. That part only happened on the first impression, but it didn't turn me off. Therefore, I was able to drop all that pretense and like go and just keep listening and go like, yeah, these are, especially the first two records, are fantastic.
It's interesting. I've heard a fact a long time ago, and I think the only other person on the show I brought it up to was Dennis from Refused. And they say that, your music peak ends when you lose your virginity. Like, whatever you were listening to around then, that's kind of the end of you exploring new music. Like, that's where you stay. And it was funny because it goes, I certainly hope not. And I asked him, what were you listening to around then? And he goes, it was a lot of, grind death metal or weird shit like that. And I find it funny because I do tend to see that there are some people as they get older, their approach is sort of like my parents did with some of the music that was coming out, where it's like, this reminds me of blank, and I'd rather just go listen to that. But to me, it kind of makes me go, when you see a band, like a Knocked Loose or even a band like Turnstile or some of these bands that are kind of on the heavier spectrum, where it's like, yes, they are doing these things that remind me of X, Y, or Z band, but they're putting their own touch on it. And to the generation or demographic that they're playing to, they probably don't have those references. So maybe when you get put on a playlist or something, maybe someone will curate and they go, hey, we are kind of into this. Go back and check it out. And that maybe that's going to inform and inspire a whole new generation of people. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of these bands and these albums and these songs are classic, because people still want to hear them. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, there's still things that are great. I mean, I love Beach House, but I don't bum on it and think like, oh, it's Cocteau Twins and Mazzy Star. Like it's great. It's like fantastic. They've made the shoegaze almost French cafe, modern twist to like this great. I don't know. I buy it, but again, because I think it feels authentic. I think Lana Del Rey is amazing, and I'm kind of late to the game on some of the. Like I don't always search out new stuff, but if it comes across, like sometimes something will hit me, and then I won't stop listening to it. I say Lust for Life. That's the only real record I've concentrated on of hers. I've listened to that record 15 times, which is a lot, and probably that in a period of 3 months. That was my cooking, cleaning the house with good headphones record, and it really was inspiring for me for the last Perfect Circle record for Eat the Elephant. There was parts of the sparseness on that record that I thought were really worth chasing, like the use of reverb and space, and some of the echoes seemed like they were caused by a different element than the actual source material. I don't know if they were, but it's something I kind of played with on the last Eat the Elephant record.
It's funny because for a while, my wife is one of those, I'd say she's more into pop and modern rap and hip hop, whereas I kind of come more from the old school of, hip hop and older music, growing up in the MTV generation, like I said earlier. So our styles kind of clash sometimes. And recently, I was listening to, I think it was Megan Thee Stallion, and basically they were sampling the Eazy-E beat for Boys in the Hood. And I was like, this is easy. And she's like, who's that? And I was like, NWA. This is an old ass beat. Because at one point she was like, "How do you know the chorus if you've never heard the song?" And I was like, "Because it's literally the same chorus to that song, just changed a little bit." But it's interesting to kind of go back. Sometimes, she's a little bit trepidatious in getting into quote unquote, older things. And I remember Chelsea Wolfe was something we went and saw. I had seen her open for Ministry, and I was doing the show review. And, I was like, Chelsea Wolfe's really cool. And, my wife was like, well, what is she like? And I was like, I don't know. It's kind of hard to pigeonhole it into something. It's its own thing. It's dark, it's heavy, it's light, it's atmospheric, it's kind of gothic. Like, it's all these things, and I can give you all these adjectives, but really until you kind of see it, I don't think you're really going to get it. And so she listened to a little bit of On the Record, and she was like, I just don't think I'm going to like this. And, I was like, okay, maybe the record's not for you, but let's just go and kind of keep your mind open a little bit, and maybe something will click. And once we were at the show, she was like, "This is really good live," but it's not something I think I'd ever listen to on record. But if she were to ever come around again, I'd probably go see it. And I'm like, I feel like that's at least like you tried and you understand that, and that's the thing I think that's interesting is sometimes things will come across on a record, but they come across exponentially different live because sometimes sometimes the adverse happens where the live isn't quite there, but on record it's just so good. I look to someone like what Imogene Heap is doing with a lot of the advancements in technology of what she's been able to do with, and I don't even know what it's called, this glove thing that allows her to manipulate her voice in real time, just like she does on the records. But to see the advances that she's making in that just has me infinitely fascinated. But in addition to just how out there she is, with her music, one of my favorite documentaries was watching the Olympus making of record. And, she's in her old childhood home, and at one point she's running up and down stairs with a stick, creating, this noise, against the slats in the between the stairs. And she takes that, chops it up, reverses it, loops it around, and then when you finally hear it in the song, you're just like, holy shit, that's what that was. But to me, it's because, I would never think like that. I would never have the mental capacity to think, okay, I'm going to go do this. But when I'm going to chop it up and loop it and do it, all these things to it, now it's just...
But see, that's the anxiety I was talking about earlier. Like that's the thing you might, but now seeing it come together is that Bohemian Rhapsody anxiety, right? Like it's like, oh, how am I going to make that? It happens. It's a bank account, right? So if that's the thing that turns you on, and this feels like this is a podcast for musicians, right? Like it's just that you're just building equity in like, oh, again, I see somebody could do this with that. You could do, high concept or high impact, but low concept, right? Like slapping a stick on the stairs or pounding your chest or doing whatever, beatboxing. They can come to great effect if you believe in yourself to make the idea come to fruition eventually. But it just starts with like chipping away. It doesn't all have to happen at once. Yeah, but it is amazing when they do come together because there's plenty of bad ideas that don't land, right?
Yeah. Out of curiosity, I saw that Greg, obviously you had brought up Greg working on all his stuff. And I saw Chris Hornbrook, a friend of the podcast, was at that Jerry Cantrell show. And I believe you were there as well. I think socials or something, I saw that you were there. But do you enjoy going to shows? Because I tend to find that a lot of musicians, especially those that tour as frequently as you have, don't kind of enjoy going to shows anymore, that it just kind of feels like an extension of work or something.
No, I love going to shows, but that show sucked because I got sick the next day. I was really sick. I got a 24-hour. I came home feeling and then I woke up the next day really sick, and so my ears were in closing down mode, and everything sounded like it was coming through a toilet paper tube. So that kind of sucked, but I had goosebumps during that show because to see Greg, who's a friend of mine, singing Lane Staley, like honoring his voice. I mean, he sounded unbelievable. I couldn't believe. I mean, I've toured alongside, worked for Fishbone, who toured with Alice in Chains back in the 90s, and I think Greg just killed it. I think he killed it. So it was really amazing seeing him sing these old songs and killing it.
It's interesting to kind of, again, talking about just this era of classic music. Like, some people are like, I don't get Alice in Chains. And I'm like, man, I don't know what you don't get. Like, it's great songwriting. Even going back and listening to a lot of their older material, there's some songs where I'm like, I don't get this arrangement, and I don't get how this was literally a popular song on the radio, because it just sounds so weird. It's not. It wasn't until like learning some of this on guitar. It's like a lot of Jerry's timing and the pacing of his riffs. It doesn't feel like where you want to hit, like on the downbeat. It's not there. It's either kind of written a little bit forward or a little bit after it, and it's all about patience. And that's the thing I think that's interesting. Most of rock and metal, I would say, is kind of this youthful aggression and going fast, and I'm not saying that they don't have those too, but man, it's really interesting to look at it when you start learning the ins and outs of someone's music, and then you just kind of out of nowhere, like these massively huge choruses, and they feel good. Like even when you're playing them, they just feel great when you hit those notes, and you're just like, yeah, like that's it. This is just a masterclass in writing. And it's just so good. Like
I would listen. There's the first song on the first Perfect Circle record, "Hollow," is very much, that was one of the oldest songs I've had, and I started it in high school. I mean, I started it right when I started playing music, like at 17. I started right at the end of my 16-year-old year, and that was one of the first songs I ever wrote. But it was different. It was like a waltz, and when I got Dirt, "Damn That River," that riff, and they tuned to C sharp. And from the moment Dirt came out, I tuned my guitars to C sharp and never went back to standard. And it was really that from Jerry's playing. And that riff, I don't even know if you can make the connection. But that Damn That River made the Hollow get the way it is. The rhythm part, not the lead guitar.
I was going to say, as you literally called it a waltz, that is kind of almost what it feels like when you play Alice in Chains riffs. Like it feels like the pacing of it, I guess more is a better word, that as you kind of said that, you were talking about the Hollow, and as I'm thinking about the arrangement, the way it starts in, it feels very much like that. I've never tried learning any of Perfect Circle stuff because it seems very daunting with a lot of the... Actually, I take that back. I have tried learning a couple of different songs when I first started playing guitar, but it was really one of the first learning experiences of that tone is literally in a person's hands, and it doesn't matter if you have all the same gear and all of that. And I just didn't have that, I kind of was rushing things, and and it was, I'll say that about trying to learn your stuff in a Perfect Circle is it was something that really taught me that you need to have patience and you need to pay attention to the details. And that's what brings out these things. That's what gives these songs the feeling that they have, is because they're paced a certain way on purpose. And I think that's something, like I said, as I've gotten older, it's something that I appreciate more about, especially that first record was that was the one that taught me a lot more about the payoff doesn't need to be instantaneous. Sometimes it's a slow, delayed release, and coincidentally, as someone once pointed out, like those are usually the best kind of albums to have sex to, because they are all about pacing. It's not about getting to the destination quickly. And when someone kind of pointed that out to me, I was like, that's a very astute observation into how music can be viewed in a different capacity as well, but also kind of allow you to enhance how you take it in as well. But kind of a last question I have for you, kind of speaking to the kids, something, I don't have kids. It's not something my wife and I want to pursue, but, something I do find interesting is kind of getting to read, your experiences of your own musical career through the eyes of your children. Is that something you kind of have thought about or really ever gotten to experience, kind of your kids getting to either see you or hear you and kind of giving you feedback on what you've done, or even getting to see you perform live and getting to see what it's like for what you do and kind of understanding it?
It's funny because my kids are 14 and 17 now. And yeah, my older son really helped me with this record, and um, it's weird to say because when you say these things, they're kind of disqualifying when you speak about your kids or you speak about your family, right? You can go like, well, they're biased, but there's something different about um, my son Atticus. He's got a very interesting, a really good aesthetic sense, right? And it's not something you can work at. This is something you're born with or not. Look, there's many things that can get in your way with that because there's you can focus on too many details and things, but there is something to be said about getting finding really worthy things within a song or artwork or whatever it is. And he was really helpful with sitting with me working on it, or sitting with me and Danny Lohner working on this record. So yeah, he's kind of partaking in that, and I'll be eventually working on his stuff. But a lot of this generation, they are hobbled by that whole internet phenomena thing. There's too many. This pissed me off when they were little, and I remember trying to get them into music because there was always a YouTube video of some girl in wherever that's 5 years old and plays Mozart, or plays with something with incredible, efficiency and accuracy. And like the kids go, it's too late for me. I'm already 8 years old. It's insane. And that's just it's the poison. There's great benefits. I'm not against it all. Like, look, but I'll say, like, call a spade, right? Like, it's like the social media thing and this experiment that we never really signed up for, but we're just kind of thrust within. We're not prepared for that, especially at a young age. And to see your peers being celebrated, and peers meaning some kid, in China that's, 8 years old, that's playing these perfect concert concertos. You're just like, how do you wrap your brain around it? How do you feel like it's okay for you to do it? That's why I find myself, as we're talking in a lot of interviews I do, I'm kind of harping on this point of people beating themselves up too much for not taking the risks and not going and doing something because they feel like, what's the point? And it's just that it's absurd. We all want to hear your voice and your story. And they're just, it does take work, but it doesn't mean it should be outside of your, now nothing's outside of your grasp, right? Like, everything's kind of accessible, and that's the hard work too. You have to cut through all the noise. But the point is, like, everyone's got a script writing. I took a script writing course for a weekend with a friend of mine, and it was an amazing thing. I mean, it's just like going to therapy or going on doing meditation, or what are all these things that are kind of exploratory. I highly recommend somebody even take a course on script writing, because you start to realize, if you and I are given a scenario with 10 details and go in a room and write that story that they told us to write, we're not going to write the same story. There's no way that our life experience is going to bring us to the same place. It's the same with music. You're given the same tools. You could be given the same key and the same tempo, but you're going to make a very different, song, and your narrative is not anybody else's. So it's never too late. It doesn't matter how old you are, and it doesn't matter what ability you think you have. You just have to just chip away at it.
Well, I think that's as good of a place as any to end this conversation. I'm very excited for everyone to get to hear this record. Obviously, you're starting tour, your tour rehearsals. The tour starts about a month from now. I know I'm going to try to either make the Chicago date, because that's a full-on solo date, versus the Michigan date, which obviously you said was opening for Pussifer, but I feel like I got to make the trek to Chicago and kind of get the full experience. So I hope everyone gets to check out this tour. Where can everyone find you, or something that you would like to plug online?
Yeah, just do billyhowerdel.com. I mean, that's where tickets are on sale there now, and there's links to get you wherever you want to go. But yeah, that's I'm usually on Instagram mostly, I guess, but that's billyhowerdel.com will get you pointed to all those places.
Awesome. Well, it was really great getting to chat with you today. Like I said, very much looking forward to everyone hearing this awesome record, and I think it demands a full album listen, and not just the singles. I think that would be a disservice to the full album experience.
Yeah, thanks. I know. Putting out even, Poison Flowers is the song we put out first, and we're about to release Free and Waitlist in 2 days. It's hard because I want everyone to hear this music, and especially before the tour. But I worked really hard on making a record that has a flow and a sequence. So it's it's a little mixed bag of feelings there. I want people to hear the whole thing, but yeah, you're going to get a little bit of piecemeal before it. So yeah, well, we'll see you in Chicago.
And I look forward to buying a shirt with your name and face all over it.
Right on.
Enjoy the rest of your day, Billy. Bye-bye.
All right. You too. Take care. Bye.
So that was my conversation with Billy, once again, of A Perfect Circle and of himself. Really enjoyed the time I got to spend with him chatting. This is one that, I've been really looking forward to getting out to all of you. And honestly, I'm looking forward to hearing all of the podcasts he did in this span of doing them. Because it is definitely, like I said in the intro, he is someone that I really love listening to him talk about pretty much anything, just because I feel like there's not a whole lot known about him. So I think that's what makes him more infinitely interesting to me. All of that said, I'm very much looking forward to hopefully going to Chicago and going and checking out the show. When I was in St. Louis this past week, as of when I'm recording this, we went and followed the Nothing More at Chae run for a couple of dates, and we went to the pageant in St. Louis. It was interesting to kind of see continually on a loop the advertisement for Billy's performance down there, and I was like, yeah, I really need to get my ducks in a row and make sure I can get down there and go see it, because I feel like it's going to be really interesting to just hear this record in a live setting, and like I said, kind of see what comes out of it, like sounds. I think with something so ambitious as this record, with a lot of the textures and layers and so forth, I feel like it'd be really interesting to just kind of see what comes across in the live setting, because I feel like either it's going to change the song dynamics a little bit as far as like how it's presented live versus on the record, and to me that's something that I find really interesting, is just how do you choose how you present this thing in a live setting. So I definitely want to go see this, and I have a feeling Billy probably will tour, this album and support this as much as he can. But, with A Perfect Circle and other things that he does looming, I'm always like, to get to see someone in this situation on this album cycle, it's probably going to be very limited. So you got to get in where you can and see these shows. And that's been something that, like I said, after following the Atreyu run for a couple of days and getting to hang with, Porter and Mark from Nothing More in the camp as a whole, it's been really fun to kind of start going back to shows. Right before that, we went and saw Slipknot, my wife and I. We're going to shows almost every week or so. I just got confirmed for a festival coming up soon. So it's one of those where it feels like this part of my life is getting back to normal. And it feels like the missing piece that has been missing for a lot of us is kind of coming back and kind of making me feel whole, and like life is back to where it used to be as much as it can be. So I'm kind of very excited about that. I probably will get into more of something to that effect down the road on a Patreon thing. So let's start wrapping this episode up. If you would like to follow Billy, you can. You can find him on Facebook at Billy Howerdel Music, Instagram and Twitter at Billy Howerdel, or you can go to billyhowerdel.com for all of your tour information, packages of buying merch and so forth. Anything to go on with Billy will be there. If you would like to keep up with this podcast, do this simple enough. Brewspeak Pod on all your socials. Give us a like, give us a follow, whatever it is. Rate, review, subscribe. You know why those things are important. Please do them. And last but not least, want to take a quick second to thank our sponsors once again. Rockabilly.com. Use our code BREWtally at checkout. Take 10% off your order. The Bean Bastard. Go to thebeanbastard.com. Pick up some delicious coffee. Or if you're in the Buffalo, New York area, go to the brick and mortar. Go support that local business. And lastly, On Point Pomade. Use our code BSP15 and get 15% off your total purchase order. And for the Brewtally Speaking podcast, I am John, and I will see you all next week with Andreas Whirling. That was a fun one, and that was really kind of one delving more into the world of spirits and branded spirits and cocktails and all that kind of stuff. Andreas used to also manage In Flames and has spent a lot of time behind the scenes working in the music industry. So this was a fun chat, a little bit something different. Very much looking forward to getting that one out to you. So enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll talk to you all then.